This week's Seder of Kedoshim to you, in which we are enjoined by Hakadosh Baruch Hu to be holy. The very first example that is given insofar as the pursuit of holiness, that which is to be the vehicle of attainment, is ish imo va'aviv tira'o, that every human being is supposed to have a sense of awe and reverence for one's parents, one's mother and one's father, albeit ve'es shabbososai tishmoru. But we are to be very, very careful, explains Rashi, studying the Chazal, that it should never be to the negation of the greater command of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shabbos, by way of example, that should a parent instruct the child not to observe the Shabbos, the child is not permitted to listen to that parent, because both parent and child are already promised to the allegiance of hearkening to the command, the greater command of the Almighty of Hashem Yisparach, to keep that day as holy. Whereas Rashi understands the juxtaposition of the sense of yira, awe for one's parent, and that of the keeping of the Shabbos Kodesh as being a lesson in the supremacy of Shabbos over honoring or fearing one's parent, of the supremacy of God's command over the command of a parent. The Rashbam comes along and says, Geshem shebaseres hadibros, nemar kibod of the aim, esau shmiras Shabbos, just like by the Ten Commandments, the granting of the Luchos on the right side, we have Zachar is Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho, which is the day that by definition declares the greater authority of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, his omnipotence and omniscience, his creation of the world, his overseeing anything and everything, and therefore we have to keep that day once a week, that day of rest, to remind ourselves who's in charge. So too, says the Rashbam, and that's followed by Kibbut Ovei, by honoring one's parent. Says the Rashbam, just like by the Seres Hadibros, one follows the other. Shehu shvo kvodam the kvod hamakom, that the honor that is due one's parent is equal, as it were, to the honor that is due HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Avkan samchan hakosel lefi pshuto. So too they are placed here in the set of Kedoshim, one next to the other. Now, what in the world does this mean? On a rather simplified level, the Torah is telling us that much as one's parents are the end-all calling place for a child growing up, a child falls and hurts one's knees. A child needs food. A child needs to go to the bathroom when one is an infant. And the address for all of those pleas are one's parent, because the parent becomes ultimately the comfort zone of unconditional love for a child growing up. And we all needed it. We all need it. So to ultimately, the greatest source of comfort, the greatest source of refuge, is none other than Ribono Shalom HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And given that, there is therefore the command of honoring and showing deference to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Zachar es Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho, and keep it of aim. Kabed es avicha v'yesemecha. Kabed es avicha v'yesemecha. Rashi cites the Gemara in Kedoshim, cites the Torah's Kohanim. What defines kibud? Honor shown to a parent. Machil u'mashka, giving food, providing food and drink. Malbish u'manel, clothing, tying one's shoes of one's parents. Machlis u'motzi, and taking them wherever they have to go. You know, Rabbosai, honor kibud comes from a lashon of kaved. Kaved means heavy. On the one hand, kibud means that we need honor a person or a Kodesh Baruch Hu, because they are so much greater than are we, and therefore the deference, the respect, the regard, the way that we conduct ourselves vis-a-vis them need be weightier. We have to think before we open our mouths, think before we sit in a chair, think before we interrupt, think before we suggest something, because they are much heavier than we, insofar as the honor, reverence that they are deserving of. But it also means that at times, why, it's kind of difficult. It's kind of a heavy obligation to do so. To always recognize that Dalafnei Miato made before whom we are standing before Kodesh Baruch Hu. And we have to second guess before we act ourselves. Second guess our machshavas, our intent. before we decide to think something, let alone act upon something, because the Kodesh Baruch Hu is standing right before us. And much the same on a much lower level. It's difficult insofar as always showing respect and regard for parents. Sometimes as children, adolescents, we lose our cool. We get upset. We feel personally attacked, personally dwarfed, as it were, by our parents, without equity and without fairness. And during those moments, we have to summon our remembrance of the fact that they are greater than we, and they are beginning and the end all for whom we are from the moment of our creation by them to the time of the passing, and even then some, and even afterwards. And isn't it so that sometimes Shabbos Kodesh, it's a little hard for us to feel the uniqueness and spirit of Shabbos. It's a weighty entity, and we have to work on it to show proper kavod Shabbos. And maybe Shabbos falls out on a date that we would otherwise wish to be elsewhere. And that's somewhat of a burden. And there are many things that we can't do on Shabbos that we would like to do sometimes, and that's somewhat of a burden. But Shabbos deserves that kavod, for that is HaKadosh Baruch Hu's essence. And no less when it comes to parents. For we need to understand, when are we called upon to be machel l'mashke malbish umanil machlis emotzi? When are we called upon to engage in this difficult, challenging, weighty work, showing weighty honor toward our parents? It's not when we are younger and they're the ones feeding us and clothing us and driving us to carpool and to school and to mishmar and to the game. It's when they are significantly aged. And it's not so simple for them, certainly not to do the shopping for themselves, and sometimes even eating, or sometimes remembering to take which vitamin or which medication. And they need help getting dressed. They need help getting their shoes on and tying them. And they certainly need help going to the doctor and going places, back and forth and back and forth. And that's where the honor of the Rabboni Shalom, says the Rashbam, which is weighty at times, comes into fruition. That we are not supposed to simply say, well, Baruch Hashem, they have the kind of insurance that enables them to move into a place that others will care for them. Or Baruch Hashem, they had the kind of insurance, or I have the ability, the affordability to get them an aid, so I could simply call up once in a while and check in on them. No. Machilu mashke, machnisu motzi. That's the weightiness of the kavod that one is supposed to give one's parents, even when it's weighty, even when that honor is rather difficult to lift up and place before one's parents. But ish imo va'aviv tira'o ve'es shabsosai tishmoru, according to the Rashbam, is telling us exactly that. Have a wonderful Shabbos.